What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 10. I can't believe we've already gotten to the 10th episode, the Panarin episode, if you will, of BlueTruth Rangers Talk with myself, Brian Attard, powered by the Sports Box. Pleasure to take some time with y'all tonight as we get closer and closer to the start of the 2021 NHL season. Lots of Ranger stuff in the news the past couple of weeks, so we have a lot, obviously, to talk about. Very interactive show, so I want to hear from you. If you're watching the YouTube replay, appreciate that. Feel free to check us out, obviously, on Facebook and Twitter that we are live. If you're watching the live show, please feel free to interact with me. Love the comments. Love to talk Rangers hockey with everyone. So a lot to go on this evening. To start this off, puck drop for tonight, what may seem to be unrelated, but I think is very related. The Philadelphia Flyers have signed center Sean Couturier to a 8-year, $62 million extension. That's a $7.75 million AAV. And you're probably asking yourself, Brian, why do we care? Why the hell do we care what the Flyers are doing and why they're, and obviously they've been collecting some ex-Rangers as of late. Well, I think the very easy reason why we care is Mika Zibanejad, because the Couturier contract, I feel, would be a fantastic comp for Mika Zibanejad. I mentioned this on Twitter earlier today. If it were to come in, if the Mika deal were to come in at what Couturier got, and if for anybody who watches the show somewhat regularly, I've been very critical of the idea of giving him all this money for this long period of time at his age. But I would be fine with $7.75 million a year for 8 years. We've been under the impression this was going to take $9.5, $10 million a year. Eichel money, if you will, which we'll talk about, obviously, the gift that keeps on giving. I would be fine with sub $8 million for that term. I mean, what more can you ask for? If it were to come in at that would be great. Chris Reistatter, welcome back. Mika will want more. 7.75 would be amazing. Keith Gurr, 7.5 is a steal. But if you look at, again, I live in South Jersey, so a lot of my friends, for better or for worse, are Flyers fans. So, we talk about it. And I try to be as even keel in my analysis because, I just want them to listen to me, frankly. But the comps between Couturier and Zibanejad are pretty close. They were both in the same draft. Zibanejad went 6th and Mika, went 6th, and Couturier went 8th in 2011. Obviously, Mika to Ottawa. Both 28 years old. Couturier's got 174 goals, 446 points in 692 career games. So Zibby's got 200 goals, 434 points in 604 games. So bit more of a scorer Mika has been. Again, more goals, more points in fewer games. But at the same time, Couturier won the Selke Trophy 2 years ago. He has been the Flyers' number one center the same way that Mika's been our number one center. And it wasn't always that way, but they grew into the role. Again, I'm not saying that Zibanejad gets this deal. What I'm saying is, for those of us who were very concerned that it was going to come in over 9, for all the talk that we have about Fox and, what Makar got and what Seth Jones got and what Heiskanen got as comparisons, by that same token, I think that we could feel very good that a 28-year-old top line center in the division is getting this deal. I think makes me think that Mika's in the 8s. Look, if it's 8.5, you got a gift to get. I think it depends if you go to 8 years. But I got to tell you, if that's what it comes back at, I think that we would all be pretty happy with that. Comments coming in. Alec, welcome back, sir. I think if Mika took that, he'd be ecstatic. I don't think he will. Keith Gersh, again, Mika's a different class, thinks he's way better. Flyers fan Anthony Morella, also the Sports Box Network, says the Rangers make the playoffs. I have to grow a playoff beard. I don't know if I'm capable of doing that. We'll see how that goes. It probably wouldn't be a very long one. James, welcome back, sir. Decent comp, but Mika is much better. Well, look, I'm not disagreeing with you. What I'm saying is, if Couturier got 8.5, if Couturier got 9, then now we're talking scary stuff. But that's not what happened. So you got to feel pretty good about that if you are a Rangers fan, which at least the vast majority of you watching this show are, for sure. Henry Zemanov. Henry, I know you post a lot outside the box. My Mount Rushmore of all-time great Rangers. Rather than have that discussion, because I think that I don't want to shortchange that one, because I think it's very difficult. I think Mark Messier is clearly there. I think you have to have a contingent from the pre-94 years. So, obviously a Rod Gilbert would be there, which we're going to talk about tonight. I think Brian Leetch would have to be there. And I think that Henrik Lundqvist would have to be there. We will talk about that. Chris says that would be the Ranger starting point. Listen, we'll see. All I'm saying here is this is a good thing. For once in this offseason, somebody who we might be able to use as a contract comp got one that seems to be not outrageous for the player. Because all these defenseman contracts, you start comparing Fox to them and you're like, well, we are totally screwed. We will see. Savior, Sean's a better face-off man, better defensively. I agree. Again, they're not the same player. There's things that Couturier does well that Zibanejad does well, and vice versa. But I texted my friends. I said, hey, that's a great deal. Like, I love to talk shit more than as much as anybody else. But, that's a very good deal for the Flyers. Henry and Richter from our friends over at Review and Preview. Lundqvist, Gilbert, Leetch, and Graves. See, and again, it's you start to it's that 4. I think there's a couple guys that are obvious, and then it's that 4th one. And I love Adam Graves. I love Adam Graves. I mean, I have my picture with Adam Graves. I wore number 9 growing up for Adam Graves. I can't put him above Mark Messier. And then, do you put more than 1 or 2 guys from the 94 team? You have to obviously, look at your history. The Harry Howells of the world, the Andy Bathgates of the world, the Eddie Jacquemins of the world, obviously Roger Gilbert, who we'll talk about tonight. So it's a tough question, Henry. I was really prepared for that one. Noah Didler, also of the Sports Box Network. Price is fantastic. Not a fan of 8-year contracts for players in their late 20s. No, I agree, Noah. But, I always say this. It's not just a hockey thing. I think it's very much, to me, a very sports thing. Is general managers will sign long-term deals because one of 2 things is going to happen. Either A, they lead to winning and the GM keeps their job, or they don't lead to winning, the GM gets fired, and it's somebody else's problem to have to worry about. So I think that's, from Chuck Fletcher's standpoint in Philadelphia, that team's going through a big, change this offseason. I think that they probably needed it. They thought they were going to get anywhere. So, back half of that deal, if they don't figure it out quick, he's out the door anyway. Again, Savior, John. Again, it's very hard, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, because Rangers history is not exactly one of grand success. Like It's harder to pick a Mount Rushmore for the Yankees because the Yankees have won 27 championships. The Rangers have won 4. So each of them matters in its own way, but it's more difficult. Justin Thal, my favorite New Jersey Devil player. Well, I mean, I have to obviously give a ton of respect to Marty Brodeur, who I believe is the best goaltender of all time. So, as level-headed as I can be, it's Marty Brodeur. On top of the fact that the greatest moment involving the Rangers and the Devils involved Marty Brodeur when Stefan Matteau scored that goal in Game 7 of '94. Not sure. I can't tell if you're old enough to remember that. I am. But Marty was the best of all time. Here's the thing. As much as I wanted to put Messier there, I also wanted to put associate with the Oilers. That's what made it tough. And see, again, it is very hard because it's try doing it with pro wrestling. Like, it's very, very difficult. It's hard to try to pick 4 guys. So I'll go ahead and just I'll plead the fifth and punt that one, at least for the time being. But one of the guys who I think we would all agree would be on a Mount Rushmore is Henrik Lundqvist, who retired after a 15-year NHL career, played all his career games with the Rangers. They're going to retire number 30 this year. And you see some of the images here, some of the great moments that he had in New York. And so many great memories that, obviously when he was pissed off and, hit the net. When you start to just look back at his career in New York, his impact, his place all time with the team, I'm going to get to a discussion in a little bit here. But I have to be honest with you all. And if I had to summarize, my feelings about the Lundqvist era in New York, really the word that I would choose is regret. Because we look back on it now, and I think that you have more context with it now. Like when you're in it, your emotions kind of get the best of you. The highs are highs, the lows are low. But I think now that we've been detached from it by a couple of years, I look back and I say, wow, they had the greatest goalie of the generation. And I don't think it was close. And that's not because I'm a Rangers fan. I think he was the best goalie of the generation. And they have nothing to show for it. And for being in New York, for being the Rangers, for being this team that's always been known to go out there and go get guys, I understand the salary cap. I get it. But they never surrounded him with enough talent to win. And when you think back to the era and what it was, he was the reason they were who they were. He was the reason they got to where they got. I mean, you think back, obviously, coming out of the lockout took the job, that first playoff series back in 2006, they got swept by the Devils. I actually went to game 2 at the Meadowlands, and I was sitting up in the upper level, and I thought I was going to die because it was extremely steep. But you look back at those Ranger years, and I will honestly tell you that those were not the most talented Ranger teams. If you think to the teams that the Ranger years where they had their best shots, the window from 12 to 15, he was God. You think back to the playoff runs that they had, and I think back to 2012 specifically, and I'll remember I had gone to Game 5 against Ottawa that year. I went to Game 5 against New Jersey that year in the conference finals. And what I remember the most about that year is, like, when they got scored on, you thought the game was over. At 1-0, if he let up a goal, you didn't know if the Rangers had the firepower to put one in. I remember when they were down 3-2 in the series to Ottawa, and they're up in Ottawa for game 6. And they were the number 1 seed, mind you, in the Eastern Conference. And it was Brian Boyle who scored this goal. And I want to say it was a 1-0 win or like a 2-1 win. It was a very low scoring game. I know that. But like, they did not put enough around him to win. And when you have that sort of advantage over everybody else in the league, where you have this great player that nobody else has, and you don't maximize that, well, like, who do you have to be held accountable for that? The fact that the Rangers didn't win, and listen, win. I'm talking about a championship, okay? Like, this is the only thing that matters. We've had these discussions, when the Islanders were making this run a couple of months ago about what winning really is. And winning to me is a championship. Were there moments that I will always remember in those runs? Sure. Stepan's goal against Washington in Game 7 in 2015 is one there. The 2 goals from Brad Richards and Mark Stahl in Game 5 in New York in 2014 to keep that going. But Hank had them. He was the reason they were where they were. And they had every opportunity. And we always say, if he was on a dozen other teams in the league, they probably win a cup for him. And the Rangers did not. We have to live with that. 1994 is, gets further and further away. And the run in which they had, it didn't amount to anything. We have to call that what it is and live with that. And and comments coming in, Henry Lundqvist, I think regret's the right word. It was an era I personally enjoyed, and believe me, I have plenty of fond memories from those years, but I get heartbroken thinking about what could have been. Henrik was a rookie, pretty much sort of following them, so it's hard for me not to give them a special place in my heart. No, listen, the way things were looking, I remember, and I know Keith is mentioning, Rick Nash in 2014, who had a great year in 2014, didn't really do a whole lot in the postseason. But I remember it felt like they were on the cusp of something. Like, it felt like they were it was going to be the golden era of Rangers hockey with Lundqvist and Ryan McDonough and Rick Nash and Brad Richards, who obviously was fool's gold, but it never got there. But it wasn't his fault. And I think there's certain images of Hank that you will remember for the rest of your life, indelible right in here. And the couple that's really stand out to me is when that goal went in Game 5 against LA, and he was just sprawled on the ice when Alec Martinez scored the goal, because he did everything he could. And that team just couldn't score for him. He did everything he could, and they didn't win. And to Keith's point, they had leads in those games, and they just couldn't hold on to them. They lost them in overtime. He deserved better. And I think it was Noah who said that. He did. I'm actually quoting Noah. That wasn't even my my intent. But I will always look back at that period of time with regret, because they've had to build it back up again. We have this expectation, this feeling that we're going to get elite goaltending because we're used to it. Because I believe we took him for granted in that we were always going to be in the game because he was there. That when you're witnessing greatness, you don't realize it in the moment because it becomes expected. The big save he would make, the acrobatic save, the way he would shut it down in the third period, the game 7 shutouts. the 35 save shutouts, actually. I think they were all on May 13th in 3 consecutive years. You just knew he would give you that. But they couldn't do enough around him. And in so many ways, the music died Game 7 against Tampa Bay. And if you remember the commercial that I'm on MSG, do I have it in my clips? I don't think I have it in my clips. I may have to go look for it. I thought I had it in my clips. Well, neither here nor there. If I find it, I'll let you know. Actually, I do. So I'm only gonna play this because it goes into what I'm saying here, because that game, that day was a big day for, now, again, those of you who have never seen it, you may not have seen my face, but this was aired on MSG for a couple of years. So we closed on our house the day of Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals. I always joke with my wife that buying a house was the second most important thing going on that day. I think every third thought in my mind is about the team. I can't turn it off. My Ranger Man Cave was a project that I've always wanted to do when I finally got a house. Most wives would not sign up for that. If you remember, why you like the teams that you do, it's probably some of your first emotional attachments that you make when you're a kid. I can't wait to share that with him. When we can enjoy it together, it'll be the greatest thing. So if you didn't know that was me, you put 2 and 2 together. People have reached out to me. Was that you? Yeah, that was me. But the story that I say there is, Game 7 against Tampa Bay was the day that we settled on the house that I currently live in. And I'll remember that day like it was yesterday. And they had never lost a Game 7 at home. And everything felt like this, after the heartbreak of the year before, that they were going to go and do something. And they lost. And as soon as that goal went in, and it was a 2-0 game, I believe. I think one was an empty netter. But as soon as that goal went in, you knew they weren't going to win. So all that time, the Rangers had this wonderful strength that they didn't do enough around. So again, Henrik Lundqvist, one of the top goaltender careers of all time. No question about it. And perhaps the worst luck that he had was he ended up being a Ranger. Now, he loved being a Ranger. The comments he made in the Larry Brooks article were just, tear-jerking. He said, I wanted to come back and I wanted to play because he wanted to play, and his heart wouldn't let him. And come on, man. It's like that hits you. That hits you. Hits you where it hurts. But again, he never had that moment. So for me, his time in New York, I'm going to say I look at it with regret. I look at it as he had so much talent, a true diamond in the rough, 7th round pick out of nowhere. Great advantage the Rangers couldn't capitalize on. He'll go down as one of the greats. They've already said they're going to retire number 30. I mean, that's going to be a very hot ticket. We'll see how much that costs. I'm sure I'll end up paying it anyway. But yeah, God bless him. He had that heart issue that thankfully sounds like is getting resolved, but it was just not worth it enough to come back to play. And it's very impactful to me that he never played a game in another team's jersey. Yeah, he signed in Washington. Well, we bought him out, which was the right move. Don't get me wrong. And James will disagree with me if he's watching. But the way that it worked out, maybe it was never meant to be. He was never meant to go elsewhere. So I take a bit of solace in that. Henry and Richter, Benoit Allaire, best goalie coach in the biz. I could not agree more with that one. Noah says Lundqvist on early 2010, Chicago or Pittsburgh would have won 2 to 3 titles, no problem. I could not agree more with that. I mean, you go back and look at some of those numbers and some of those advanced stats about, goals saved above replacement, hard saves. I mean, you don't know what you have until it's gone. And that era of time, he was God-like. Alex says, for all our elite goaltending, quote unquote, Jacquemin, JD, Van Beesbrook, Richter, and Hank, is it really elite when we have only one cup in the last 60 years or so? Is it a more fundamental team structuring flaw? I don't know that you can make the connection between regimes and teams that way, because the team that played in front of Jacquemin and in front of Davidson and in front of Van Beesbrook and Richter, although there was some overlap there, and in front of Hank, it's completely different. The game has changed. The coaching staffs have changed. The ownership's changed. So it's the only common thread is the blue shirt, is the diagonal Rangers. But I don't know that you can start talking about fundamental flaws when you're talking about that long of a period of time with so much change going on. I mean, I wasn't around for the run in 79, but my understanding, at least the way it's been said to me, was that team shouldn't have been there. I mean, they won the first game against Montreal, lost the next 4. I mean, they ran into a juggernaut. And then they didn't come back until 94 with Richter. Xavier says JD was never elite. He just got hot in the playoffs 79. I was not around to dispute you, so I'm going to take your word for it. But yeah, Henrik Lundqvist. So now I will attempt to answer a question that I think is frankly unanswerable, and that is Lundqvist or Richter. So obviously, in my formative years, you see Mike Richter with the Stanley Cup and him and Hank together. I was 10 years old when they won in 94, and I understand I'm not 10 years old anymore. Maybe in some ways I probably still am if you ask my wife, but I mean, he was all I ever knew was a goaltender at that time. I mean, obviously I knew of Van Beesbrook in 92 and the run that they had, but like Richter was the guy. It's funny because it's kind of like the Mount Rushmore question. Like if you ask 49ers fans, Montana or Young, you're going to have conversation. You're going to ask Cowboys fans, Aikman or Staubach. You're going to ask, teams that have had, I mean, the point I'm trying to make to you is we're splitting hairs here as to, who would you rather have? Richter won the Stanley Cup in 1994. And yeah, that hardware matters for sure. Dan Marino never having won a Super Bowl doesn't mean that Trent Dilfer is better than Dan Marino as a corollary. Different teams, but you understand my point. Richter had so much more around him than Hank did. Again, I just got done saying about the years where the Rangers had their runs. It felt like it was all on him, that he was what it is. They were only going to go as far as he could take them. When you think of those Rangers teams, did they have star players? Yeah. Marian Gaborik had a cup of coffee with New York. Brad Richards had a cup of coffee with New York. Rick Nash had a cup of coffee with New York. Early Hank's career, Jaromir Jagr was still here. But then you think back to the teams that Richter played for. Those teams had Mark Messier and Brian Leetch, and admittedly later in their careers, but Luc Robitaille and Wayne Gretzky, Adam Graves, these guys that we hold dear. And I think that, to me, and again, I'm not saying here, I'm not trying to convince anybody of it. Everyone's going to have their own take on it. Lundqvist was the better goaltender, which takes nothing away from Mike Richter. I love Mike Richter. I have Mike Richter stuff all over the Ranger room. I have Lundqvist stuff all over the Ranger room. But Richter wasn't why the Rangers won in 94, in my opinion. The story of 94 is the story of Mark Messier and Brian Leetch. Like, those were why. Whereas the story of the Rangers' window of contention was Lundqvist and Lundqvist alone, in my opinion. He was the story. Richter also, he played, but he was more injury prone. So if you look at some of the numbers, right? So Mike Richter had 301 wins in 666 career games over 14 seasons, all with the Rangers. 2.89 goals against, 904 save percentage, 24 shutouts in that time frame. Henrik Lundqvist, 459 wins in 887 games. That's number one all time for the Rangers. That's sixth all time in the NHL. However, to be fair, shootouts help, whereas Richter had ties. Hank's career goals against was 243, 918 save percentage, 64 shutouts in his time in New York. So we're talking about the number one and number two best goaltenders of Rangers history. No question about it. And Richter has the Stanley Cup that Hank never got. But I don't think that means in a vacuum that makes Richter the better goaltender. Like, I think if you were honest with yourself and you said, we have one game to win, I think you would take Henrik Lundqvist. And I will go to my grave strongly believing that if the Rangers had found a way to win Game 5 against the Kings when they lost in overtime, the Kreider hit the post, they come back to New York for Game 6, that's a Ranger win, and you give me Henrik Lundqvist in a Game 7 for the whole shebang, I don't care where it is. They win that game. So the Rangers were a goal away from basically coming back from 3-0 against the Kings. Am I a homer to say that? Sure. I don't care. That's my God's honest belief that had they won Game 5, they win the whole damn thing. Despite the fact that they blew those leads in the first two games of the series against LA. They lost that series in Game 2 with Dwight King and the blown call. It is a question you can't answer, but to be, again, in my opinion, I think it's Lundqvist. I would probably say that Ranger fans who are maybe a little older than me, Rangers fans who are in, call it their mid 40s or early 50s, may side with Richter because, well, I may even look at Eddie Jockman too, but I don't know. I think that my adult-ish years where, I graduated college when, I graduated college in 2006, and that was the year coming out of the lockout. He took over the team at that point. So like my 20s and on, he was the guy. And the period of time that team had of contention was probably the longest they've had in a very long time. That 94 team, remember, so in 92, which was a Van Beesbrook team, they actually kind of split. The Van Beesbrook team, they won the President's Trophy, lost in the second round to Pittsburgh. The following season, dead last, didn't make the playoffs. Then they won the Stanley Cup in 94. 95 was the lockout shortened year. They were the last to beat Quebec in the playoffs. They made a run in 96. They lost to the Flyers, I want to say, in a sweep in 1996. They lost to the Flyers again in 97 with Gretzky in the conference finals. That was it. That's all she wrote. They didn't make the playoffs again for 7 years. So Hank was more of a vital piece to the run than Richter was, which takes nothing away from Richter, who had plenty of those moments. The penalty shot against Pavel Bure, the split, the man, the clearly talented play. I don't want this to sound like I'm bashing Mike Richter, because I'm not. I think Mike Richter was phenomenal. Thank God he was a New York Ranger. It comes down to, do you give Richter the credit for the cup that you don't give Hank, because Hank never won it? Like, is that a Hank problem? Like, again, to me, I don't think Richter was the reason. If you had to list reasons the Rangers won the Stanley Cup, it's Leach, Messier, maybe then you get to Richter. Whereas those Rangers runs, it was Lundqvist and then a very steep drop to the rest of the team. He was the reason they were there. James says, Richter had a massive fivefold, not comparable. Hank was great up until almost his last year. Richter was only great for a couple. Henry says, Rangers are to goalies what Yankees are to center fielders. I can see some of that. Noah says, nearly impossible to compare between eras, but Lundqvist on the basis that, as you said, he was by far the goalie of his generation. Richter was not his fault. Played in the same year as Prime, Brodeur, and Hasek. Vastly underrated among the wire NHL base, gives Lundqvist the edge. And I would concur with what you're saying there. Chris says, Richter wasn't the best, but wasn't better, but he won the cup. Argue with someone who said Hank's not a Hall of Famer because he didn't win a cup. No. No, Henrik Lundqvist is a first ballot Hall of Famer. He might be unanimous, actually. I don't know how I know in baseball they have like the unanimous Hall of Famers. I'm not exactly sure they do in hockey. But he's in, okay? He's in. I'm not even worried about that. Not even worried about it. No, said Richter's still a great, just not one of the greatest ever, like Lundqvist is. Mike Epstein says, I'm 46. I take Richter in a game 7, but I make a very good point. Richter was not the reason why they won the cup. And Mike, to your point, if we think back to okay, so let's say the Rangers. I mean, they blew the series against the Devils in 2012. That was a shot to win, but that was a Hank team. That was a defensive first team, right? So 13, they ended up, losing to Boston, whatever. The 14 team probably overachieved due to him. The 15 team got to the finals due to him, or got to the conference finals due to him. Those teams just couldn't score goals in the playoffs. The Rangers didn't have it off. The Rangers in 94 were mowing through teams. 6-0, 6-0, 5-1, 5-2 against the Islanders in round 1. 5 games against the Caps. And when they went up against New Jersey, that was the second best team in the league. And that was an all-time great series. I have to give the edge to Hank. I think Hank was a more talented goaltender, in my opinion. I'm not telling you that you need to agree. I'm giving you what I think. But at the end of the day, we were blessed to have them both, and we have one championship to show for it. Chris Rice said our first ballot, absolutely. Noah Dibler, Rangers opponent in second. Penguins fan. I know. Might have had some divine intervention if you remember that story with Marty St. Louis. So again, that's my attempt to answer what obviously can't be answered. But I'll take Hank. And I will do my absolute best to be there when the 30 is raised, because it's very, very well deserved. So, the calendar is about to turn to September, which means I have to call someone to close my pool pretty soon. But we're exactly 1 month away from the first preseason game. And Jack Eichel, well, the thing about Jack Eichel is still in Buffalo. He hasn't been traded, and he hasn't had the surgery yet. So those of us who were all in on the idea of acquiring Jack Eichel, I think we need to think to ourselves now that maybe that ship may have sailed in the short term. Because let's be honest, he hasn't had the surgery yet, which means that if he has it tomorrow, when is he going to be ready to play? Now you're probably talking November, December. And I said this 2 weeks ago on episode 9 that Kevin Adams is a moron and has totally overplayed his hand. Horrible card player. Not sure what the hell he's doing. But I don't know now if any team can make a deal involving current players to go get him. And some teams have, used their cap that they would have allocated to him. The Rangers have some cap space. But, we were talking around, again, if you go back to the original deal that I had offered, if we stay with that, with Strome, Kravtsov, Jones, and a pick. Well, you can't give up Ryan Strome now because you have no second-line center until Eichel were to show up. The problem now with Kravtsov is you've moved on from Buchnevich, for better or for worse. So now Kravtsov's penciled into your top 6, barring you doing something else, which they may or may not do at this point. Jones probably starts in Hartford, will be my guess, and the one is the one. But I think at this point now, the way it's played out, through no fault of the Rangers, by the way. And you could, Drury said he's not interested. I don't buy that. I said that 2 weeks ago. I agree now. They can't count him now. Because when is he going to play? The most aggressive of time frames had him getting the surgery back in June to be ready for the start of the season. The puck's going to drop on a preseason game in 30 days. So, and then you have Buffalo fans who are stupid, by the way. Hope they're watching the show. You can give me a thumbs down on my YouTube video if you want. Buffalo fans, joke. That are like, oh, we need Lafreniere and we need Kako and we need Fox, and like, you need a medication is what you need, or whatever. That ain't gonna happen. But at this point, his price has to be just going completely through the floor. And Alex says, let him depreciate, because that's the thing. Like, I don't see a scenario where Buffalo can bring him back there. So who is Kevyn Adams helping here? I hope he's not helping the Sabres. Like, you held on to this valuable item, but like now it's nowhere near worth as much as it was 2 months ago. And why aren't you letting the guy have the surgery? Like, that's become an even larger mess now. So I think at this point, I don't know what happens. But now I don't think if I'm the Rangers, I give up roster talent. I don't think I can. Because I don't know when I'm getting this player back. You know, if it was the draft in July-ish, like if this is when you did it, then you can gamble a little bit that you get the guy back in time or whatever you're going to do. Like this has gone. No one's going to convince me that this is, this is helping the Buffalo Sabres. So, to me, the Rangers at this point, I think that it's not about this upcoming season. They can't do it. And it is what it is. You've been watching the show. I was all in on the idea. Okay, I'm an unabashed, should have done it. You can't do it now. So you're coming into the year with Zibanejad and Strome as your 1-2. Zibanejad's not yet signed. Maybe the Couturier deal gets something moving there. Hopefully, we'll see. Again, Strome's your number 2 guy. I very, very concerned about giving him a long-term deal. So we'll see where the chips fall. But I think at this point, those of us who were in the camp of we're getting Jack Eichel for next season, I think we need to be realistic and say that's probably not going to happen. If it hasn't happened by now, it's probably not going to happen for this season. I'm not throwing in the towel and getting the player, period. What I am saying is I think that the ideas that we had, it's not this year. It's not this year. Noah says, honestly, if I'm Jack Eichel, I'd wait to get the surgery as late as possible. I wouldn't play another game for them. I think he's done there anyway. Alex says, Buffalo owners being petulant, screwing over their own team in the process. Could not agree more. It makes no sense. I don't even know if it's the ownership anymore, Alec. I really think that it's the GM, like trying to not get bent over on a trade. Chris says, I'm fine with Strome because of chemistry with Panarin. Would you believe if I told you that, Chris, if you actually look this up, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I did see them on the internet, on Twitter sometime this week. Panarin actually scores more goals away from Strome than with him. Strome without Panarin does nothing. Panarin does less with Strome than without Strome. So we got to be careful about that one. Panarin might make Strome versus Strome helping Panarin. I think it's more Panarin lifts him up. So to me, you bring in a better player at that spot, he'll do the same thing. Obviously, would be remiss if we didn't bring up Raj Gilbert, who passed away this week at the age of 80, known by many as Mr. Ranger. He was the first Ranger to have his number retired, his number 7. He was known by everybody as a very out there with the Rangers. I had a chance to actually talk to him a couple times on Rangers fans Zoom calls when the Rangers were up in Toronto. As you see, the gag line, obviously all their numbers are retired. Had a chance to have some talking with him during the Rangers series against Carolina. He was very like, we're going to get him in the 3rd. He was always very upbeat. I have a Roger Bear signed puck, which obviously I have a collection of pucks in the Ranger room. So I just wanted to bring this one up just to, he, obviously he played well before my time, but I think that you have to respect your history. And, there's a reason they called him Mr. Ranger, and you look at his place in Rangers history and NHL history. The first Ranger have his number retired. 1982 Hall of Famer, still leads the team in goals scored by a Ranger with 406, still leads the team in points scored by a Ranger with 1021, number 3 in games played with 1065, which makes him almost a point per game player. So, we talk about a guy who also, they never won. is he viewed different? Is his career viewed differently if the Rangers get a Stanley Cup for him? I think it's important for the team's history that he was alive to see Vic Hadfield and John Rattel have their numbers retired. I was there for Rattel night. I wanted to make this point actually during the Lundqvist segment, but a lot of these things become, and I think this is going to hit the older guys more than me, because the Lundqvist thing hits me a little more than maybe it hits them. It's a stark reminder of your own mortality and how old you are when the players that you grew up with and rooting for retire, and in the case of Rod, pass away, and it just makes you it's a reminder of our own mortality, that we're not going to live forever either. These guys that we viewed as heroes, they're too old to play, or they've moved on, to up there. So, look, rest in peace to Rod Gilbert, a guy who I know that this franchise was lucky to have, and he loved everything about being a Ranger. He was very with his time. I mean, he's been at the Garden so many times when I've been there, and just, with people, and, he loved everything about being a New York Ranger. I think he was a wonderful ambassador for the team. I mean, 80's not young by any stretch, but it was a shock to see him go. I think he was ill towards the end, is some of the story that I've heard. But, rest in peace. He will forever be remembered with this franchise and in NHL history. Obviously lucky that we've had him in New York. Not a Rangers fan, Noah says, got to give credit where he's due. All-time great, big place in Ranger history. Alex says, right or wrong, winning a championship does make a big difference in perception. And again, it's the perception of Lundqvist in a way. Because again, interesting corollaries between these two guys, in that very much the face of the team while they were there, very into the community type people. Lundqvist did so much charity work, and I'm sure he's going to continue to do more charity work now that he's hung the skates up, that you just hope that their personal accomplishments are not diminished by not having won the championship. The championship is why you play the game. I'm not discounting any of that. He had a great career. Lundqvist had a great career. It's interesting correlations, and that, obviously Hank's retirement and, Rod's passing, right after, one after the other. So I'm emotional week for Rangers fans, but again, God bless him. Rest in peace. Thank you for everything you did for the Rangers, not just as a player, but as a person. And I don't think I heard anybody say anything negative about the guy ever. So can't always say that. Noah says, not a basketball fan at all, but Kobe taught me that lesson more than anyone. It's true. Even pro wrestlers, like guys that we grew up when we were kids, like in the late 80s, early 90s, and then they keep dying. And it's like, wow, man, like I'm just not as young as I used to be. And hopefully, like, it makes you, value life more and go out and do more things, especially in the world we're living in these days. Last topic for tonight is Jeff Gorton, former GM, obviously. He was on the Cam and Strick podcast, Cam Jansen and Andy Strickland. And I just wanted to touch on some of the more interesting things that he had to say. And I really recommend all Rangers fans go out and listen to it. You got to cut it, because it's just the second half of the show. But he went over a lot of his history, as how he got into hockey, how he was up in Boston and was never really the best actual player. And he kind of got in as an intern with the Bruins, worked his way up, didn't get the job when Chiarelli got it. But I think it's interesting, what he said about a couple of storylines in this offseason. And he was asked about the Tom Wilson thing. I mean, look, the Tom Wilson thing is what it is. I mean, you want to say Tom Wilson broke the Rangers? Look, I can't argue with you at this point. They made a lot of moves as a result of that. And, he was saying, I'm going to do some quotes here. No, I didn't know that it was going to turn into that. It surprised me. Obviously, I lost my job. It probably has to be more than that. I don't know, but it has to be more than that. It can't be just one thing. So, was it a knee-jerk reaction by ownership? Probably. Is it the end of the world? No, because as I've said on the show a couple times, he's had some great moves as GM of the Rangers, but the 4 best things he did, my son could have done, and that was drafting Kakko, drafting Lafreniere, both of which made available by ping pong balls, signing Panarin, who only wanted to come here, and trading for Fox, who only wanted to come here. He was asked, why they, weren't as tough. He said, yeah, I wouldn't say, and I'm paraphrasing that, we weren't really the toughest team, but there was a time and a place. He said that when you have young talent like the Rangers did, you have to get them ice time. And, the quote here is, you can't tell me JD, who loves toughness, didn't know we weren't tough. All the meetings we had with David Quinn talking about getting tougher over time, we also needed some of these young guys who were playing for us to have to deal with adversity, see how they did with it too. Obviously, it didn't go well, and Wilson should have been suspended. I didn't think that night was going to turn out to be what it turned into, where people were losing jobs. But the part there that's important is everyone is like, oh, well, the Rangers need toughness. The Rangers need toughness. Are the Rangers at the point now where they need toughness? Because he said, like that's one of the last things you do when your team's ready and you're still playing with a bunch of kids. So, look, they went all in on it in this offseason, as we all know, documented very well here on the show, and with all of you. We'll see what that means. He was asked about the PR statement where the Rangers, went after George Parros, so he was unfit to be in the role. He said, was he shocked by it? He said, yeah, I think that's fair to say. You might have seen it the first time I did. So, that came from above him. And obviously it wasn't Davidson. So, I think they both kind of fell on their knives a little bit. I wasn't surprised by that either. I mean, I really do think you should listen to it. The other thing that the situation was brought up with Tony DeAngelo, about, who he was as a player, Gorton's thoughts, Gorton's about him said he was, quote, passionate about how he thinks the world should work. Said that the Rangers understood that, but they would have to speak to DeAngelo and cross the line and ask if it was really worth to go back and forth with the fans. And obviously, you see him on Twitter going back and forth with people as a celebrity. It's one of those things where it's a lose-lose for him. And he said, we are in the entertainment business where people are paying for tickets. So why do you need to necessarily argue with them? But to his credit, he did say that Tony was a good guy and that teams were calling about him. He said the Rangers were a young team, didn't have enough veterans to hold DeAngelo accountable and keep him in check. And he would be good for teams who do have that. And he said a lot, his teammates love him. So, for all of the negativity out there about DeAngelo's history, and I'm not here to, say good, bad, or indifferent, but I think that there might be a divergence in between what we as fans think and reality. Even Mark Stahl was asked when he was in Detroit about Tony. He's like, yeah, all the guys asked me about him. Like, we don't really know why the media thinks it is what it is. What I will say is this, through some back channels, I was able to hear a couple things. The incident in Canada where everyone believes that, he made some kind of a racist comment to another player. I can tell you that it wasn't a racist comment. What I will say is, yeah, you probably shouldn't say that. If you watch South Park, they say it pretty often. I'm not minimizing it. I am not saying it was okay. What I am saying is I think there's a difference of opinion in the hockey world or the fan bases as to what actually happened there. And I think obviously, there's politics involved, but I'm not going to get into that tonight or ever, because that's not a hockey thing. But I think that he's gotten more of a bad rap than anything else. No, we'll go offline on that one. But the point is, and I said this before, and James has been very vocal about they should have traded him. They're never really going to trade him, but I always felt he was going to be gone at the end of this season anyway, just simply because they had right defenseman coming up and they had no spot for him. I will still sit here and tell you that the trade for him and the pick, which blew up. I mean, the Rangers got Tony DeAngelo and Lias Anderson, which is nothing, basically, in exchange for Ranta and Stepan. What I will say that is still a win is the Rangers were a half a week away from Derek Stepan being cap locked for 4 years at $6.5 million. And if you think that the buyouts were bad, then it would have been, a multiple of that worse, because he deteriorated heavily once he left here. So all in, and James said, the trade was fine at the time. The trade's fine now. The Rangers have absolutely nothing to show for that trade except for the second round pick, which became Will Cooley, because that's what they got for Elias Anderson from LA. And I'm still fine with it. They blew the pick. I think we all knew they blew the pick when the pick was made, simply because this is a middle six center. He can play your third line right away. Why are you drafting third line players in 7th overall? They tried to move up to go get a McCarr or a Pettersson, who they loved. They just couldn't get up high enough. So I'm fine with it. I'm very much at peace with it. I have no ill will towards Tony DeAngelo. I hope he does moderately well in Carolina, although they're a team I always worry about, and they're in our division. So again, so that is a concern there. But again, I will tell you, if you have some time to go listen to the Jeff Gorton interview on that podcast, I highly recommend it. It's a good listen, for one, because you kind of hear about his story, but a little insight into the Rangers and what happened, I think is good for all of us. So if you have the time, I would listen, put on in your car or something. I think you'll definitely, enjoy that. So yeah, listen, we are a month away from preseason, so we'll definitely going to have a lot more content. My life's getting a little bit busier on a personal level. I've just started taking courses towards my CFP designation. I do work in finance, and those are the big letters in my neck of the woods. So it's a long process. There's courses I'll be taking between now and through January, and I'll be testing for it in March, and hopefully in March I can tell you that I passed it. But we'll probably, couple weeks get into preseason, maybe some roster projections in a couple of weeks. But it's coming quick, guys. It's still warm at least where we are in South Jersey, but the leaves are going to be falling before we know it, and it's going to be hockey season. And I can tell you that I cannot wait. I cannot wait to get back to MSG. The last game that I went to ended up being Hank's last start. It was a loss to the Flyers, who I hate. And I'm bullish on the team longer term. I think they're a playoff team this year, which we'll talk about. We'll get into more depth as we start to talk about some of the line, what that might look like, especially, going into preseason. But, we'll get together in a couple of weeks to kind of see where we are. And who knows if anything's happened between now and then. I mean, the news cycle is the news cycle. But thank you for taking the time to watch BlueTruth tonight. If you're in the South Jersey area, the Sportsbox Network, which is, BlueTruth is powered by the Sportsbox Network. We actually will be live and on location Saturday afternoon in the Hamilton, New Jersey at Showcase Sports. We'll be there from 1 to 3 for a grand opening. So we'll be talking mostly some NFL there. But listen, if you're in the area, you're more than welcome to come by and say hello. And we'll be pumping out the hockey talk as we get closer to the season. So again, if you're watching this on Facebook or Twitter, make sure you give us a follow on the page, or like. Feel free to share it with your Ranger fan friends. If you're catching this on YouTube on the replay, obviously we appreciate that too. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, but follow the Facebook page. I like to post when we're going to have live shows so people can at least, if they want to take time, which I obviously appreciate, that they can do that. But yeah, guys, hockey's going to be here before we know it. So on behalf of me, myself, and I, Brian Attard, thank you for watching tonight's episode of BlueTruth, and we'll catch you in a couple of weeks. Take care.